Most people know the story of Al Capone, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and the Italian outfit that ruled dominant for decades over the Windy City. But there is a shadow history, a story that was written in the tenements of Maxwell Street and the Greystones of North Lawndale neighborhood. It is the story of a city within a city, a Jewish Jerusalem, they called it, where the language was Yiddish, the currency was votes, and the muscle was provided by a specialized subdivision known as the Jewish Wing. At its peak, this division controlled the most lucrative gambling and extortion territories of the west and north sides of the city. From the early 1900s pushcart bookies to the high-stakes card rooms of the 1950s, a line of succession was forged in blood. It began with the pioneers like Julius, Love and Putty, Annixter, Benjamin, Zucky the Bookie, Zuckerman, and ended in the 1990s with the man they called the Syndicate Hammer, Leonard Lenny Patrick. Welcome back to James on the Mob. I'm James Jenkins, your host and narrator. And in this episode, we're stepping into the violent, shadowed world of Lenny Patrick, one of Chicago's most feared Jewish mobsters. A man trusted when intimidation wasn't enough, action was the only language left. This is the 60-year saga of Lenny Patrick and the evolution of Chicago's Jewish mob within the larger framework of the Chicago outfit. Patrick, who would kill his first victim at age 19, would go on to confess to 5 other murders and deny many more that he was suspected of having been involved in. He bridged the gap between the Jewish tenements of Maxwell Street, Chicago's Lawndale neighborhood, to the outfit, and later, when the demographics had shifted to the Rogers Park neighborhood on the city's north side. He was the enforcer who kept the west side in a state of terror for half a century. But as he aged, the game got harder, the money was less, and the feds were looking everywhere. So at the age of 78, he was faced with the prospect of life in prison and the betrayal of a mob he didn't recognize anymore and that recognized him even less. His testimony in 2 cases in 1992 and 93 helped to bring down 2 outfit heavyweights, Gus Alex and Sam Wings Carlisi, bringing down the last of the connection guys and bleeding the nose of the outfit's leadership. Both would die in prison. Patrick would die in his bed in 2006, age 92. Chicago didn't always look like steel and glass. Before the skyline, before the expressways, before the headlines, there were neighborhoods that evolved into worlds of their own. And on the city's west side, in and around Maxwell Street and the North Lawndale neighborhood, a powerful community took root. In the early decades of the 20th century, this wasn't just a place people lived. It was a place people belonged. Storefronts with signs in Yiddish, the air carrying the smell of fresh bread, pickles, and smoked meats, pushcarts lining the sidewalks, mothers bargaining with street vendors who shouted prices over the noise of trolley cars, kids in the streets running wild. Men worked 6 days a week and still found time to argue over politics, prayer, and baseball. Synagogues were packed tight on holidays. Families were packed tighter in apartments above bakeries and butcher shops. Hard work, tradition, survival. They called it a kind of Jewish Jerusalem, a mecca of culture, faith, and working class life carved into the grid of Chicago. In the late 19th century, Eastern European Jewish immigrants fleeing old world persecution settled in the Maxwell Street neighborhood on Chicago's near west side. By 1912, the Sunday market at Maxwell and Halsted was officially recognized a chaotic bazaar of pushcarts and peddlers. And in this environment, survival required more than a trade. It required a shatarker, Yiddish for strongman. The first generation of Jewish mobsters were community protectors who balanced their illicit rackets with neighborhood loyalty. There were the Miller brothers, Max, Hershey, Harry, and Davy, with their all-in-one restaurant, boxing gym, and gambling center, who appointed themselves protectors of everyday Jews who encountered violence as they moved around to other parts of the city. But the architect was Julius Love and Putty Annixter. While others were flashy, Love and Putty had the real staying power. Described as the high priest of graft, Annixter possessed a unique capacity to enter a private negotiation and walk out with exactly the deal he wanted. He was notorious for treating police and city officials like so much putty in his hands, molding them to suit his organization's needs and ensuring that his district-wide gambling and vice operations remained protected. He wasn't just a neighborhood tough. He was a district-wide manager of vice, operating alongside West Side powerhouses like William Billy Skidmore. Annixter created the template for mob and politics integration. He was the one who pulled the diverse Jewish gangs of Lawndale into a cohesive, organized group. But politics was the true gateway to power. In the 20th Ward, Morris Eller was a Russian immigrant who rose through the Republican machine to become a ward committeeman by 1918. Eller's district, including the Maxwell Street area, was so notorious for voter fraud and intimidation that it earned the name the Bloody 20th. He also provided the political cover for the Jewish gangs of the area, and specifically for Love and Putty Annixter. Eller was a key ally of Mayor Big Bill Thompson and Al Capone. And during the infamous Pineapple Primary, 1928, Eller's men, including Jewish hoodlums like Sam Kaplan, terrorized the polls. Eller would continue to rule unchallenged until 1931, when the political winds in the city of Chicago shifted away from the Republicans to Anton Cermak and the new Democratic machine. By 1920, the Jewish community began moving 3 miles west into North Lawndale. And by 1930, nearly half of the ward's 112,000 residents were Jewish. And in the 1930s and 40s, the 24th Ward was the domain of Alderman Jacob Arvey. Arvey, a child prodigy of politics, who lived at 1323 Independence Boulevard and who built the ward into what Franklin Delano Roosevelt called the best Democratic ward in the country. His protege was Arthur X. Elrod. Elrod had made money as a real estate investor and insurance broker and was the man who stepped in for Arvey while Arvey was serving in the Army during World War II. But Arvey's treasury and electoral efficiency relied on a different kind of partner, Benjamin Zucky the Bookie Zuckerman. Zucky was the last of the independent Jewish bosses. He took over Julius Love and Putty Annixter's operation when Love and Putty died in 1943. He operated with Arvey's and later Elrod's blessing, controlling gambling concessions along Roosevelt Road alongside his partners Ben Glazer, Willie Tarsh, and Louis Dan. Zuckerman represented the old model. He protected the Jewish enclave from outside gangs and kept the peace. But the Chicago outfit, now led by Paul Ricca and Tony Accardo, wanted total control. They didn't want independent bosses. They wanted taxable subsidiaries. The outfit approached the ward boss, Elrod, and informed him of the changes coming to North Lawndale. And Elrod, knowing the power of the outfit, reluctantly or actively agreed. The friction reached its climax on January 14, 1944. Zuckerman was gunned down outside his residence at 4042 West Wilcox. And though he would deny it, Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaris were the killers. When Zuckerman's partner, Ben Glazer, heard the news of his murder, he reportedly dropped dead of a heart attack. Louis Dan fled to California, and the last partner, Willie Tarsh, was shotgunned to death in April 1945 by Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaris. The independent Jewish mob was decapitated. Lenny Patrick, the outfit's preferred candidate for Lawndale boss, assumed Zuckerman's rackets and kicked up to the bosses for the next 50 years. In the vacuum left by the murder of Zuckerman, a new breed of mobsters stepped forward. Leonard Lenny Patrick was born on October 6, 1913 in Chicago, Illinois. While early law enforcement files occasionally suggested his family had emigrated directly from England, more precise biographical records indicate that Patrick was a first-generation American, the son of Morris and Esther Patrick. His parents were Jewish immigrants from England who settled in the Lawndale neighborhood, which was, at the time, becoming the cultural and commercial heart of Chicago's Jewish neighborhood. The Lawndale environment of the early 20th century was one of intense density, characterized by a rapid transition from Irish and Bohemian populations to a Jewish majority. It was within this specific socioeconomic enclave that Patrick's criminal worldview began to take shape. The stability of Patrick's early home life was shattered in 1918 when his mother, Esther, passed away. This loss proved catastrophic for the family unit. Morris Patrick, struggling to provide for his 4 sons in the midst of a post-war economic shift, found himself unable to maintain the household. And consequently, Lenny and one of his brothers were placed in an orphanage, an experience that likely catalyzed Patrick's early alienation from traditional social institutions. This period of displacement coincided with the onset of Prohibition, a time when the streets of Chicago were becoming an open laboratory for criminal enterprise. By the time Patrick reached the 7th grade at Shepherd Grammar School, located at the intersection of Fillmore and Francisco Streets, he had abandoned formal education in favor of the street-level economy. Patrick's initial entry into the underworld was defined by the sidewalk hustles of the West Side. As a teenager, he was already a fixture on the corner of West Roosevelt Road and South Kedzie Avenue, where he operated regular dice games. These early gambling operations were the precursors to the massive handbook networks he would later control. However, the transition from petty street games to major felony crime was swift. In early April 1932, Patrick, aged 19, committed his first murder when he shot Herman Glick, another Jewish tough, for having earlier pushed him around in a petty altercation. Glick survived for 2 days, identifying Patrick as the shooter. But in those days, deathbed testimony could not be used in court, and without other cooperating witnesses, Patrick walked free. Later, Patrick aligned himself with a group of young men who sought to capitalize on the vulnerability of regional banks. On June 28, 1933, Patrick was sentenced to 10 years in prison for his participation in a bank robbery in Culver, Indiana. The Culver robbery was a family affair in part, as one of his co-defendants included his brother, Jack Patrick. Patrick was initially incarcerated at the Indiana State Reformatory, where, before being transferred to the Indiana State Penitentiary in February 1933, a reformatory psychologist labeled Patrick a high-grade moron with an IQ of 72 and the mental age of 11. Psychological tests aside, this period of imprisonment was a transformative era for Patrick, moving him from the category of a neighborhood delinquent to a documented hoodlum with ties to a professional criminal network. While incarcerated, he matured into a seasoned operator, learning the institutional mechanics of the penal system that would later inform his defensive strategies as a mob leader. After serving nearly 7 years of his sentence, Patrick was paroled on March 11, 1940. Patrick and his childhood chum, David Yaris, known as Davey or Dave, was a foundational figure in the Chicago outfit's Jewish wing and a primary enforcer who would later bridge the gap between the syndicate's Midwestern power base and its expansion into Florida. Born on November 7, 1912 in Chicago, Yaris rose from the street-level rackets of the Lawndale neighborhood to become one of the outfit's most trusted torpedoes, and later its chief representative in the Miami area. Yaris, the son of a Chicago ICE deliveryman, was a top-tier torpedo who once drove for outfit bigwig and fellow Jew Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik. And somewhere along the line, likely through Guzik's patronage, Patrick and Yaris became partners affiliated with the outfit. And after the demise of the Zucky Zuckerman Group, they together integrated the Jewish rackets of Lawndale into the outfit's broader apparatus. In 1946, the outfit moved to seize the Continental Press, the national race wire service, from James Reagan. The outfit used its Jewish hammer for the job. On June 24th, gunmen firing from a modified delivery truck ambushed Reagan at State Street and Pershing Road. Reagan lived long enough to identify Patrick Yaris and William Wally Block, and died in the hospital weeks later when mercury was found in his blood. Patrick, Yaris, and Block were indicted. The case collapsed when the key witness, John White, was murdered and two other witnesses recanted. This hit established Patrick and Yaris in the outfit as experts on gangland executions. Patrick and Yaris established their headquarters at the new Lawndale restaurant at 3714 West Roosevelt Road. This wasn't just a diner. It was the clearinghouse for every hard-card book in the 24th Ward, from Kedzie to Cicero. No one placed a bet without Lenny's okay. By the 1950s, Lawndale was transforming again. The 24th Ward, encompassing much of the North Lawndale community area, underwent one of the most dramatic demographic transformations in American urban history between 1950 and 1960. For decades, Lawndale was a bastion of Russian and Eastern European Jewish life, once containing approximately 1/4 of Chicago's entire Jewish population. By 1930, nearly half of the ward's 112,000 residents were Jewish, and the commercial corridor along Roosevelt Road served as the heart of this community. The shift began in earnest following World War II, as the second wave of the Great Migration brought thousands of black residents from the Deep South and the overcrowded South Side to the West Side. White flight accelerated. Real estate speculators utilized predatory tactics such as blockbusting and panic peddling, hiring black men to drive noisy cars through white blocks or paying black women to push strollers in certain areas to stoke fears of plummeting property values. In a span of just 10 years, the white population of North Lawndale plummeted from 87% in 1950 to less than 9% in 1960, while the black population surged from 13,000 to over 113,000. This transition was characterized by a predatory real estate phenomenon known as contract buying. Because the Federal Housing Administration practiced redlining or refusing to provide traditional mortgages to black buyers, residents were forced to purchase homes on installment contracts. Under these predatory agreements, buyers built no equity and could be evicted for a single missed payment, losing their entire investment. Speculators often bought homes from fleeing white families for as little as $10,000 and then resold them a week later to a black family for $25,000. This systemic extraction of wealth left North Lawndale impoverished and its infrastructure neglected, a condition Alderman Benjamin Lewis later famously described as a socioeconomic garbage heap. Political control remained with the white bosses like Arthur X. Elrod, who continued to lead the ward even after moving to Lakeshore Drive. In 1958, the machine recruited Benjamin Lewis, a former bus driver and precinct captain, as the 24th Ward's first black alderman, to provide a black face for the white leadership. This was the concept for what came to be known as plantation politics. Lewis, known as the Big Cat, lived a luxury lifestyle on an $8,000 salary and was further funded by the outfit's gambling revenues, and all the while being directed by other political bosses who had long moved from the Lawndale neighborhood. After his 1963 re-election, Lewis began asserting independence. His political mentor, Arthur X. Elrod, had died in 1959, and maybe he felt that Elrod's death had meant that he now held Elrod's power. He started replacing white precinct captains and allegedly began running his own gambling books out of his ward office without Lenny Patrick's or the outfit's permission. And on February 28, 1963, Lewis was found murdered in his office. He was handcuffed to his desk, tortured with cigarettes, and shot 3 times in the back of the head, the killer having used a pillow to muffle the sound of the gunshots. An FBI informant later named Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaris as the hitman, but no charges were ever filed, and the murder became a symbol of the machine's refusal to tolerate black political autonomy. Although Patrick always denied involvement in the Lewis murder, even to researchers late in his life, the case serves as a chilling example of how the Jewish wing functioned as the enforcement arm for the political machine's criminal status quo. The reach of Lenny Patrick's network extended into the national spotlight following the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Patrick's childhood connection to Jack Ruby, born Jacob Rubenstein, became a subject of intense interest for the FBI and the Warren Commission. Patrick and Ruby had grown up on the same West Side blocks and attended the same grammar school. In the summer of 1963, just months before Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald, records indicated that Ruby had made several phone calls to Patrick in Chicago. On November 25th, 1963, a day after Ruby assassinated Oswald, the FBI interviewed Patrick regarding his relationship with the Dallas nightclub owner. Patrick downplayed their connection, describing Ruby as a neighborhood chum, but claiming they were not close friends and that Ruby had no significant links to organized crime. Patrick's testimony was among the primary evidence cited by the Warren Commission to support its conclusion that Ruby was not acting as part of a mob conspiracy. However, the House Select Committee on Assassinations later noted that the FBI's interview of Patrick was surprisingly brief and failed to determine the true nature of his relationship with Ruby. Given Patrick's known role as head of the Jewish wing and his deep ties to the outfit, the same organization that had been the target of Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy's anti-mob crusade, his exoneration of Ruby remains a point of historical contention. The connection underscores the reality that Patrick was not merely a local gambler, but a figure situated at the crossroads of national criminal and political narratives. The history of the Chicago outfit is frequently analyzed through the lens of its Italian-American core leadership. Yet its operational longevity and the structural resilience were fundamentally bolstered by an elite tier of non-Italian associates who specialized in the critical interfaces of political corruption and street-level extortion. Among the most enduring and consequential of these partnerships was the association between the Greek-American political strategist Gus Alex and the Jewish-American enforcers from Lawndale, Leonard Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaris. And while Patrick's criminal apprenticeship began on the sidewalks of West Roosevelt Road and South Kedzie Avenue, running dice games, simultaneously, Gus Alex was being groomed for a vastly different role. Born on April 1st, 1916, Alex grew up in the Armour Square and Chinatown areas on Chicago's South Side. His father operated a restaurant at 26th and Wentworth, a haunt for Capone and Nitti factions. Unlike Patrick, who functioned as a street presence, Alex became a protege of Jake Greasy Thumb Guzik, the organization's primary political briber. This ethnic stratification, Greek, Jewish, and Italian, created a functional synthesis that allowed the outfit to navigate diverse political and criminal environments. By the late 1940s, the relationship between Gus Alex, Lenny Patrick, and Dave Yaris had solidified into a vertical hierarchy. Alex functioned as the strategist, while Patrick and Yaris served as the primary enforcers of the 24th Ward, a territory characterized by lucrative betting markets. And of course, the new Lawndale restaurant served as the nerve center for Patrick's operations. Informants reported that Patrick and Yaris maintained absolute control over this restaurant, which hosted a full-scale, hard-card bookmaking operation covering the area from Kedzie west to Cicero Avenue and from Madison south to 18th Street. In addition to these Chicago holdings, Patrick and Yaris had investments in pre-Castro Cuba, Los Angeles, and Miami Beach, where Yaris later relocated to and where he operated the Tahiti Bar at 244 23rd Street as a front for the Chicago family. Despite the geographic separation, Patrick and Yaris remained in constant contact and in constant business, with Yaris furnishing the brains for their horse betting network on Chicago's North Side and Miami Beach interests, while Patrick managed the street-level muscle. Life was good. If there was a year in the life of Lenny Patrick when he realized that life was changing, and not in the good way, it was 1974. First, his lifelong friend and partner, Dave Yaris, died of a heart attack in Miami Beach in January. Yaris had long ago branched out to Miami, both to the benefit of himself, Patrick, and the outfit. In addition to gambling rackets, Yaris was involved with labor racketeering. He and his oldest son, Ronald, had helped establish a Teamsters Local in 1957. The loss of Yaris was like the loss of an arm. Patrick scrambled to maintain the Miami investments he had had with Yaris, but he couldn't be both in Chicago and Miami. And weeks later, on April 18th, Ronald Yaris was found murdered in his home, a clear sign that the Miami money machine days were over. Patrick and Yaris had been so close that Yaris named his younger son, Lenny, in honor of his friend. Lenny Yaris would join Patrick's crew. And since the late 1950s, during federal law enforcement's infancy in the fight against organized crime, Lenny Patrick had been on their radar. He was one of the first names on the list of the Chicago FBI's top hoodlum program. He was later removed from that list when it was determined that he answered to more people than answered to him. And by the mid-1960s, the demographic shift in Lawndale was complete. The once Jewish Jerusalem was gone. Patrick had followed and shifted his headquarters to the North Rogers Park neighborhood. This move was not an easy transition. Patrick had to reestablish gambling operations from the once lucrative Lawndale Golden Goose. Further, he had to establish new police and political connections to protect this new network. Harvey and Elrod were no more. He had to rely more on Gus Alex to make the arrangements between the police, politicians, and the mob. The feds knew all this by 1974, when their efforts, both strategic and tactical, were in its adolescent stage. Patrick's first chance to turn on the mob came when he was subpoenaed by a grand jury to testify on his knowledge of organized crime and given immunity, provided he speak truthfully to the questions they asked of him. Lenny was 61. The money was less. The respect was growing faint. The times, they were changing. But Lenny refused to testify, and from 1975, spent the next 4 years in Lexington Penitentiary for contempt of that grand jury. The first time he'd seen a jail cell since 1940. Patrick was released from prison in 1979. He had kept his mouth shut and came home to reassert his control of what was left of the Jewish wing of the outfit. The decline of the Lenny Patrick Street Crew began in the late 1980s, driven by a combination of internal betrayal, leadership shifts in the outfit, and relentless federal investigation. The transition of Lenny Patrick from a feared outfit enforcer to a high-ranking government witness was a process defined by a total erosion of the criminal infrastructure that had sustained him for 50 years. The 1980s marked a significant transition in the operational focus of the Lenny Patrick Street Crew, as the illegal gambling landscape was increasingly targeted by federal legislation. The crew pivoted toward the lucrative and violent world of juice loans, extortionate loans with usurious interest rates. This shift was facilitated by the rise of first Joseph Ferriola and then Samuel Wings Carlisi to the position of outfit boss. Under the Ferriola and Carlisi administrations, the relationship between the central leadership and the Patrick crew became more formalized through a complex system of financing, repayment, and do-as-I-say leadership. The first major factor in Patrick's flip was the defection of his second-in-command, Mario the Arm Renone. Renone was a vicious enforcer and skilled burglar who had become increasingly paranoid about his standing within the outfit. In 1989, while on a mission to carry out a hit ordered by the syndicate, Renone noticed he was being tailed by other outfit members, including Rudy Fratto and Willie Mussino. Convinced he was being set up for a hit, Renone fled to the FBI and agreed to wear a wire. Renone's recordings were devastating for Patrick. They captured Patrick discussing criminal activities and directing Renone to carry out acts of violence, such as the attempted arson of the Lake Theater in suburban Oak Park. These tapes provided the FBI with the leverage necessary to indict Patrick on racketeering charges. Simultaneously, the leadership of the outfit was changing. Patrick's crew had been placed under the control of Sam Wings Carlisi and his right-hand man, James Marcello. Carlisi, unlike the older generation of bosses, viewed the Jewish wing as a purely financial asset to be taxed or discarded as needed. When the FBI investigation began to heat up, Carlisi's crew ordered Patrick to shut down his loan operations to minimize legal exposure, effectively signaling that Patrick was now disposable. By 1992, Patrick was 78 years old and suffering from a serious heart condition. Faced with the prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison and realized that he had been abandoned by his own organization, or it was actively seeking his elimination, he had also watched helplessly when in January 1985, the outfit had eliminated his namesake, protege, and the son of his best friend, Lenny Yaris, during Joe Ferriola's purge of outfit dissenters. Patrick made the decision to cooperate with federal prosecutors Chris Gare and Mark Vogel. His decision was also influenced by the cooperation of another crew member, Gary Edwards, who had begun providing the FBI with information about the crew's juice loan business. Patrick's flip was a tectonic shift in the history of the Chicago mob. He was the highest-ranking outfit figure to turn state's evidence up to that point, and his testimony broke the back of the West Side's criminal traditionalism. He confessed to his involvement in 6 murders and provided detailed information on the inner workings of the outfit's board of directors. In the fall of 1992, a man who had spent 50 years as the syndicate hammer for the Chicago outfit did the unthinkable. He raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth. To the bosses in the gallery, he was a rat. To the feds, he was a miracle. To himself, he was just a man who had run out of places to hide. Mr. Patrick, you've admitted to 6 murders. Who else did you kill? That's about it. Anybody else? Think hard. No, I run out of cemetery. The most profound consequence of Lenny Patrick's cooperation was the 1992 trial conviction of Gus Alex, the last of the outfit's connection guys. This trial marked the first time a high-ranking Greek fixer had ever been convicted of a crime, despite his decades-long career as the outfit's primary political briber. Patrick's role in the conviction was central. He wore a wire and taped conversations with Alex that captured the mobster approving violent extortions directed at successful Chicago businessmen. The trial was a dramatic affair that pitted the aging enforcer against his longtime partner. Patrick's testimony provided a detailed history of their relationship over the previous 35 years, describing how he reported to Alex and obtained his approval for all major criminal ventures. The government also called several of Patrick's victims as witnesses, who had been terrified to testify until Patrick's own cooperation ensured their safety. The Chicago outfit, then led by boss Sam Wings Carlisi, viewed Patrick's defection as an existential threat. And to prevent Patrick from following through with his testimony in the upcoming racketeering trial of Gus Alex, the syndicate initiated a campaign of high-stakes intimidation. The target was Sharon Patrick, Leonard's daughter, from his marriage to a woman named Lorraine Lordman. On the morning of May 17, 1992, a powerful explosive device was detonated outside Sharon Patrick's home in the West Rogers Park neighborhood of Chicago. The bomb was strategically placed to cause maximum psychological damage without necessarily killing the target, though the blast was undeniably lethal in its potential. The explosion occurred in the driveway, blowing a massive crater into the pavement. The blast completely destroyed a BMW sports car belonging to Sharon's fiancé and was powerful enough to shatter the windows of numerous neighboring residences, sending a shockwave of terror through the quiet residential community. The tactical significance of the West Rogers Park bombing was clear. By targeting Sharon Patrick, despite Leonard's known estrangement from his daughter at the time, the outfit was signaling that no family member was safe so long as Leonard Patrick remained a canary for the government. This marked a departure from the idealized mob code that supposedly exempted women and children from gangland warfare, demonstrating the desperation of the Carlisi administration as its power base eroded. Gus Alex was ultimately found guilty of racketeering and extortion on October 1, 1992. He was sentenced to 15 years and 8 months in federal prison and ordered to pay a fine of $823,000. In 1993, Patrick also served as the government's star witness in the trial of Samuel Wings Carlisi, James Little Jimmy Marcello, Anthony Little Toe Zizzo, and Anthony the Hatch Chiaramonte. The Carlisi Street Crew had financed Patrick's juice loan operation with a $200,000 investment that had ballooned into $500,000 within 2 years. Patrick's testimony detailed outfit chores, including a 1988 attempt to firebomb the Lake Theater in Oak Park during a union dispute. At one point during his testimony, Patrick admitted to his role in 6 murders, but notably committed perjury when he claimed one killing was self-defense to avoid state murder charges. Patrick also admitted to shaking down members of his own family, notably his brother, brother's son-in-law, and later another nephew, for money. Despite this, his testimony was critical in securing the convictions of both Alex and Carlisi. Gus Alex died of a heart attack in 1998 while serving his sentence in Kentucky, signaling the end of the Connection Guys' fixer lineage that dated back to Jake Guzik and Murray Humphreys. Sam Wings Carlisi was sentenced to 12 years, 7 months in prison, and fined $125,000, but died in custody in 1997. Leonard Patrick had been sentenced to 7 years in Sandstone, Minnesota, but was released sometime in 1998. All pending charges were eventually dropped, as there was nobody left alive to testify about people like Zucky Zuckerman. And after entering the Witness Protection Program, at first lived in either Minnesota, Oregon, or Arizona, but eventually requested to come back to Chicago, which he did, and lived quietly just north of Chicago in the suburb of Morton Grove. He lived to the age of 92, passing away on March 1st, 2006. He was the last man standing. Everyone else was either dead or in jail, and no one really cared anymore. So goes the story of Lenny Patrick. The legacy of Lenny Patrick is one of fundamental contradictions. He was no saint, that's for sure. He was a man who helped build the very organization he eventually destroyed. His career represents the final chapter of Jewish organized crime in Chicago, a phenomenon that was largely limited to the second-generation children of immigrants who found in crime a path to power and wealth in a city defined by ethnic machines. By the time of his death, on March 1st, 2006, at age 92, the Jewish wing was a relic of the past, its influence eroded by the same forces of assimilation and law enforcement that Patrick had spent a lifetime trying to outrun. Patrick remains a figure of singular importance in Chicago's criminal history, a man whose life mirrored the city's own evolution from neighborhood-based corruption to a sophisticated, globalized underworld. And in the comments below, let me know your thoughts on Lenny Patrick, Dave Yaris, or the Chicago Jewish mob. I'm James Jenkins. If you've enjoyed this peek through time, you know what to do. Hit that thumb, subscribe to the channel, share, and look out for more James on the Mob. Thank you for watching. Hey, and remember, life is short, so don't whack it off. See yous.